Before we start, it would be great, Alex, if you could just introduce yourself, a little bit about you and the work that you do.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. My name's Alex Fleming. As Johanna said, I'm the country head of the Adecco Group for the UK and Ireland. And the Adecco Group is a global HR workforce solutions company. And we have 10 different brands that specialise from entry level, placing people into entry level roles right the way up into executive recruitment and also outplacement and also training, particularly in the digital space. I've been with the Adecco Group now for 23 years, so many, many years, and have pretty much done most roles in my tenure with the Adecco Group. And it's great to be here today, as this is a very passionate topic of mine.
Great, thanks, Alex. My first question is with regards to toxic cultures. What do toxic cultures look like in your view, Alex? Especially the ones that might be more subtly toxic than others.
Sure, I think toxic cultures are ultimately really, really repressive environments. And they're commonly where people don't feel equal to others. And I think that's what creates them often. Somewhere where they don't have a voice, where they potentially are ruled by fear. And I think more often than not, it's because they lack strong leadership, which I think is absolutely essential to driving engagement and collaboration. And of course, for me, that's what absolutely gets the best out of people. In terms of subtle toxic cultures, they can really be especially damaging. I attended a workshop last week which focused on microaggressions. For example, this is when an organisation says it really champions diversity and inclusion, yet leadership and potentially colleagues don't live and breathe these behaviours, with there being negative side comments or making fun of people or just environments that are not enjoyable to work in. And I think even if this is through ignorance, it can be so damaging to an organisation's reputation and culture. And I think toxic cultures, it can feel very difficult for colleagues to speak up and feel that they have a voice. And I think, some of that comes maybe from previous experiences where it's been met negatively to have that voice, or they've been accused of just moaning and causing a fuss. And I think what some leaders fail to recognise is that actually respectfully challenging the status quo and welcoming colleagues' feedback really makes for a much more successful organisation. And that empowerment is at the heart of a positive workplace culture. And I think if people really feel listened to when they speak, and then action is taken on what people say, regardless of their role or seniority, it's irrelevant. Everybody has a voice. And, I find that every day, everybody should have a voice, and you learn from people every single day. So for me, that's what's really important.
Absolutely. And something that you just said there, Alex, I wanted to follow up on that distinction between when an employee or when someone is raising something, and the difference between it being a moan or, as someone feeling that it's causing trouble, or if people are consistently saying negative things about an organisational culture. And I remember really early on in my HR career, I had a senior executive in HR, just talking about culture and talking about culture in terms of, employees have come here to work and deliver outputs, and it's less focused about on the way that they feel, and if they're not doing a good job. And I think often very traditional styles of management and leadership focus on only outputs rather than less around the behaviours. But if a senior leader was to come and talk to you and say, I just think people are moaning, what advice would you give them in terms of how do they distinguish between that moaning and then what really is genuine concern about the behaviours that are happening in an organisation?
And I think, sometimes it's not easy, but I think you've got to really listen to what they're saying. And you've got to then talk to other colleagues within the business. I think one of the things that's really important is to constantly be talking to all levels in the organisation. That's the best pulse check you can ever get of the culture in the company that you work in. And so being present and making that time to talk to people throughout the business at all levels will help you understand whether this is something that is just a one-off, somebody moaning, or whether this is something that's much more serious than that. So it's finding that validity. And I think it's not difficult to find that validity if you are present enough and you're talking to enough people at different levels. It will all come out. And I think that is what's so critical with your relationships at all levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And my next question is a topic you and I have talked about a lot previously, and it's around culture change. And it's an incredibly hard thing, firstly, to measure. But to change culture, because it's about the behaviours of people as well as the organisational system. What should organisations be looking at to really make impactful culture change?
So I think culture is all about diversity and inclusion, and it needs to be driven from everyone in the business, not just leadership and not just employees at every level. Every single person has to take accountability. If you look at the Harvard Business Review, it backs up the research that found that active and visible executive sponsorship is the top contributor to success of any change effort. We have a board level executive sponsor for diversity and inclusion within the Adecco Group, and they make it very clear to my leaders, and I make it very clear to my leaders that it is all of their responsibility to call out any behaviour that doesn't talk to our values. This whole see something, say something mentality is so critical, but it does need to be managed in the right way when you see it. So we have a D&I committee as well. It's headed up by HR, but it is also heavily, the board are heavily involved in it. And there's a specific board sponsor, as I said. And it's made up of ambassadors within the business. And so it's not just about the leader. It's also the committee's responsibility to really drive that change. It's really up to everyone. I think what's important about the D&I policy, when you talk about it more from a sort of policy change perspective, is that also talks to the values, and that you are regularly updating and communicating this throughout the business so that everyone understands it. And it's not this tucked away, untalked about document that just sits on the intranet that's there for lip service. It's all about utilising that document, communicating, and them seeing it as part of the culture. And that all teams and functions have a part to play. So legal, risk management, marketing, communications, I think everyone has a critical part to play in that policy to really bring it to life and to make sure that it's not just tucked away, as I said, on the intranet and not part of the culture of the organisation.
You touched on something that I think is incredibly important there, Alex, that this isn't just seen around people and behaviours. Whilst that's an incredibly important aspect of changing culture, you must look at this in terms of your end-to-end business. So as you say, legal, supply chain, a part of that, the policies that you have within those functions that are driving culture, but also then connecting it to customers. So connecting it to thinking about all aspects of what makes up culture, and culture is an extension of every single person that touches on the business as well. And I think sometimes when it's only or primarily focused on the people aspect, it's missing actually the breadth of really what makes up a culture within an organisation.
Yeah, and I think, you as an organization, we have two customers. We have our clients that we serve, that we're providing staffing requirements to, or HR solution services to, but we also have our candidate population. And as an organization, you have to be representative of your customer base as well as internally. And I think that's incredibly important, that you see that 360 view.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that you mentioned there is the importance of this being about every single person, so from leadership right through. And it was a conversation actually that I was having earlier this week on one of these sessions, and it came up something similar around if you see something, say something. And what advice, Alex, would you have? Because we often, in organisations, advocate values such as see something, say something, speak up when you see it, call it out in the moment. And these are all, in practice, very good pieces of advice. But I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone that was really introverted, and they were in a real personal dilemma, saying, actually, I see things that I want to often speak up about, but I don't feel doing it in the moment because confrontation makes me feel really uncomfortable. Yeah. And so kind of my advice to him was thinking about a way that's authentic for him, that you can speak up, but speaking up doesn't mean that you have to do it in a way in public with a large group. There are lots of ways in which that you can do that's authentic to you, but still making sure that you're calling behaviour out when you see it and it doesn't feel appropriate to you. And I'm just wondering if you've got kind of any thoughts on that, Alex.
Yeah, I think you're right. I totally agree with you. You have to do it in an authentic way. And I think the organisation has to find a way to be able to make it comfortable for people to respectfully call out these issues that they face, or these things that they see. I think whilst depending on what it is and how big a deal the situation is, I think it is important that if you see it, you call it out. But I think if you're more comfortable to do that on a one-on-one and just ask somebody if you can have a quick word with them, rather than shouting it across the office, which then potentially puts the person who may not be doing it even knowingly, may put that person in a very awkward situation in front of colleagues. I think doing it in a more refined way and one-on-one can be a better way to manage it. But also it's important that people recognise and know that you are dealing with it if others have noticed it too. So finding a way of making sure that people understand that these things are not being allowed to just happen and not being called out. But I think also having an outlet for people who don't feel so comfortable to respectfully challenge that themselves with the individual, maybe bringing HR in or legal, or having an independent team of people that they would feel more comfortable to speak to, more on a peer group level. So having people through the organisation at different levels that people are therefore comfortable to speak to, if they would rather speak on a confidential level in that space, can also be a good way to make sure that you are hearing people's feedback and then managing how best it is to deal with that depending on the severity.
I know, absolutely. One of the other themes that's really emerged from conversations we've had over the past couple of weeks is the role that intersectionality plays. And I wanted to get your thoughts, Alex, on specifically championing culture change. What role do you think intersectionality plays into this?
So I think there needs to be a better awareness of the role of intersectionality in organisations. And I think it's important that diversity and inclusion activity focuses on all differences.
Mm-hmm.
I think historically a lot of businesses have taken a women first approach and just focused on tackling gender equality. And whilst, of course, gender equality is very important, it shouldn't be prioritised over other injustices.
Mm-hmm.
And I think promoting D&I in the workplace is an invitation to hear and learn more about other people's experiences. And it's difficult. So I think it's important that leaders show a balanced interest, even if they personally are an advocate of something that is very close to their heart. I think all differences need to be felt, to be recognised, supported and celebrated.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Alex. And it's, again, it's one of these areas that intersectionality and making sure that we're focusing on the breadth of diversity and all aspects of diversity, because for many people, you might associate with many different groups. Our identity is kind of multifaceted, I often describe, and so having a single focus on diversity kind of goes away the notion of making positive impact. And it kind of in addition to that, on intersectionality, and I just read something this morning that was essentially a real argument between a number of women from different groups on the progress that has been made around gender equality, and whether the work that we've done that we've been doing on gender equality to date, has it been as quick as it could have been if we had focused on all aspects of gender equality? For many argue that kind of it's progressed the opportunities for white women, and it's a discussion that I was actually having yesterday with our panel members, more than for other women, and it kind of comes back to that point around intersectionality and the importance that we must play on thinking about this across all aspects of diversity.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, the work that you have done, and I know that this is an area that you've championed a lot around opportunities for gender equality. Just before we came on, we were sharing some news about progress that you've been making within your organisation. If we were to just think about personal perspective in the area of gender equality, how do we kind of change the next 5 years in terms of areas that we can really be focusing on to make sure everyone feels included in that conversation?
Sure. I think we've done a lot of work internally as an organisation. So we've recently, in fact, just this week announced to the market that we are appointing a new female leader as our chief sales and marketing director globally. And so that's another female that will be added to our global board, which is great news. I think in the UK we have got a very, very balanced senior leadership team. And what I've seen over the years, as that has started to shift, which it has over the last 5 years in the UK and Ireland, what I've started to see is, as you start to change that mix, it starts to really open up the organisation to see what's possible. And we have seen so many more people put their hand up in the company to believe and to have that confidence to really say that they believe they can go to the next level. They would like to be developed. They would like an opportunity to progress. And I think we've seen that more and more as we have seen the diversity of our senior leadership evolve over time. And that's such a positive has had such a positive impact, notwithstanding the positive impact that having that diversity across our leadership team has made to the richness of conversations that we have every day. Actually, the opportunity and the way the organization views the company to work for, that they work for, and the culture that that creates has been so powerful. And I have seen many new people come through the organization that historically have told me that they wouldn't have felt comfortable to have put their hand up and to have said that they wanted to progress. So I feel really proud of what we've done. And I think we have to tell those stories more. We have to share the successes that we have had as organizations across the entire area of and inclusiveness. And we have to really find those champions and really share the knowledge, understanding, and educate to really make everybody sees the true benefits. And as you mentioned earlier, it's not always easy to quantify that. But you see improvements in retention, you see improvements in employee engagement, you see improvements in productivity. The result of not doing it is too big a challenge to not make this absolutely at the forefront of your strategy as we move forward.
Yeah, completely. And to that point there around productivity, performance and improvement, they're intrinsically connected, aren't they? And I think you can't be thinking about your business performance and your results and your quantifiable measures without thinking about this conversation, because actually something that you said earlier really made me think is that when people are confident to be able to share upwards within an organization, that tells us a lot about the culture of that organization, and that shows in my view that there are really high levels of trust within that organization. And we know there's so much evidence that shows once there's trust within an organization, really genuinely high levels, the productivity increases enormously because of the way that people are working with each other. Yeah. And so I think those organizations that have their D&I agendas only sat within HR, focusing on people and not thinking about them in connection with their business outputs, yeah, are never going to get the benefit, and they're never really going to make the connection that we need to around productivity, efficiency, and the way that people are working with the importance around this topic.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask another question, which I didn't prepare you for, so I'm hoping you don't mind on this one. But it's around the telling story point, Alex, and it's something that I know that you've done, and I know that it was your initiative within Adecco Group, but it's around this point of vulnerability, and in my view, and again, the psychology shows us is that cultures where people feel that they belong, but they also, most importantly, feel that they're unique, and they feel that they can share their uniqueness with everyone, and there's no negative consequences to sharing that, whatever it might be, whether it's something to do with the things that I enjoy personally, whether it's something to do with a mental disability that I might have. If I feel that I am able to share everything that is unique with me, and that there's never to be a negative repercussion, those are the organisations that have the most inclusive cultures. Would you mind, Alex, just talking a little bit about kind of the point of vulnerability and that specific example that you did was before lockdown at the start of this year?
Yeah, sure. So I actually attended a really, really fantastic diversity and inclusion 2-day seminar, and it really got me thinking about our organisation and some of the positive changes that we had made in the last 5 years, having been in the organisation for a very long time, I have seen many, many different iterations. And so I was thinking about how we had evolved, and that we had some really, really positive stories to tell, and how we made sure that, given we've got new people joining the organisation all the time, how we really champion that and showcase who we are to both people who've been here a long time and to new people joining the organisation as a whole. And so we have an annual conference every year. So we bring our leaders together and then all colleagues together later in the day to share the strategy and also to talk about really important topics. And we focus on 4 key areas: a client, candidate, colleague, and we added an additional topic at the beginning of the year, community. And within that, it's very important piece around diversity inclusion is encompassed within community. And I spoke with my leadership team and I said, you know, I'm really proud of how we've evolved, and I'm really proud of how we've built a culture. And I believe that starts with the leadership team, and the leadership team that we have has become more and more diverse and has, as I mentioned earlier, has really built on the richness, where leaders are comfortable to recruit people to their weaknesses, so they have people with complementary skills around them, makes for, without a doubt, the most inclusive and best environment for people to succeed. So I talked to my leaders and I asked if they would be comfortable to do a panel session at that particular leadership conference, a live panel session with me, to discuss some of the adversity that they had overcome throughout their career and how they had overcome that, and some of the experiences and the stories that they had experienced in order to help our teams understand who we were, and that anyone can get on here, and that it's really, really encouraged for people to be honest and for people to be their true authentic selves. And so it was quite an emotional experience. I was hosting the panel. It was an emotional experience for me with our colleagues. I was so incredibly proud that my leadership team were comfortable to share those stories. And whilst an emotional experience, it was an incredibly powerful experience, and people still talk about it today. And I'm still eternally grateful for my team for sharing, because I think it's helped others in our organisation recognise and really understand and know who we are, and that the art of the possible, to coin a phrase.
Completely. And that point of sharing those stories and showing that vulnerability so that others feel comfortable in being able to share things that are important for them. We all know, and the importance of having role models, the importance of having people that look like us, but also that are able to share. And I remember having a conversation last year when I was out in New York, and I did a session with 12 white men on the topic of diversity and inclusion. They were the senior executive committee, a large financial institution, and they sat there and they said to me, Johanna, we're committed to this. We want to make progress. We recognise, we look around this room, we need to make progress. We need to do something different. But what we can't do tomorrow is just entirely change this leadership team. We can do that over time, but we need to be showing that we're doing something now. And again, very similar to what you were just describing there, Alex, the one piece of advice that I gave, that I said, it's very simple. I said, each of you will have something that people won't know, that will be an invisible characteristic that will show the humanity around you, and that is, and they all did that, and they've made huge progress in their diversity and inclusion agenda because of that first thing that they did. And it's a really simple but very effective, but it really put them out of their comfort zone. And I think it's that other thing I often say is that we often have to feel really uncomfortable when we're working in the space, and if it makes us feel uncomfortable, that's an indication that we're likely to change, or that it will prompt change as well.
Yep, absolutely. Very, very powerful.
And Alex, do you have any kind of case studies or other reference points of organisations that you think that have done well in this area?
Yeah, I think one example, I think L'Oreal do this really well. They have a great case study. They believe that stronger companies and communities are created when people from every culture, background, lifestyle are accepted and valued. And I absolutely agree. And to ensure that their product meets the needs of every form of beauty and every culture, their team members must be diverse and inclusive. And as we mentioned, I say the same. You have to be representative of your customer base. And L'Oreal is also widely known for offering robust diversity and inclusion training to employees across the world. And I think their results speak for themselves. In 2019, I think women occupied just over half of the leadership positions compared to that in 2010. And in fact, half their board members now are female compared to in 2010, I think only a fifth of their board members were female. So not only are they really championing this, the results are really there to see. I also think another great example is MasterCard. They've done great things in the D&I space, and they consistently make it into the top 10 diversity Inc. 50 best companies for diversity list. And I know that they believe that diversity drives better insights and better decisions, and that diversity and inclusion is absolutely the backbone for innovation. And I would absolutely agree. And we've seen that ourselves as we've diversified and have a different structure in our leadership teams and our teams in the UK and Ireland. And that's a real quote I love, that it's the backbone of innovation, because I think that is so, so true. And I know they're also huge supporters of the LGBTQ plus community, and they have the true name features on cards, which allows people to have their chosen names displayed on cards rather than their birth names if they want to. And they also have some great other projects, getting older employees in the company more active when it comes to social media, with the aim of really addressing generational barriers. And they have a project called Relaunch Your Career, which is all about providing training and networking opportunities to people who are re-entering the workforce after taking a break for whatever reason. So I think L'Oreal and MasterCard are great ambassadors in this space.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I actually was on a session earlier this week, and the Chief Diversity Officer of L'Oreal was there, and they are definitely doing some really fantastic work. The other thing as well that I really like about L'Oreal is that when they've made a mistake, they own it. And so when something hasn't been perfect, and not just in the area of diversity inclusion, their comms and their PR it always, to me, feels very authentic. And if a mistake has been made, and I think that that's also really important, is that sometimes things don't go perfectly, and it's important to acknowledge if things haven't in the past, or the progress. And I think, again, a lot of the comms and PR around Black Lives Matter that we've both seen in the media over the course of the last few months, those organisations that, in my view, have done really well are the ones that have acknowledged their shortcomings and made commitments about what they're going to do, rather than those that have made statements of, yes, we support and these are all the things that we've done. Because, again, employees and consumers look around and say, that's not reflective of what really is happening. And it all goes back to the point around culture, and whether a culture is a very positive one or a negative one, and people know what's happening around the workplace. And I like that, the example that you gave there around MasterCard of relaunching careers and thinking around generational differences is another really important one to be for organisations to be looking at. And I think it's at all ages as well. I mean, a lot of the US do a lot of work in the area of veterans and getting people back into the workplace, but also there needs to be lots of focus, and I think particularly the impact of COVID and the pandemic. I think organisations that are really championing change and are really ahead in this space are the ones that are going to be really focused on thinking about creative ways of giving and providing opportunities for younger generations that we know are just going to be so impacted, whether that's doing internships experience in a different way. I think those are the ones that, again, that will be at the forefront of this.
Agree, absolutely.
And I can see we've got a number of questions from the audience, Alex, but I wanted to ask you one last question, and it's about individual commitment. We often, whenever I've been on D&I panels or see people speaking on this topic, we focus on the responsibility of organisation, responsibility of leaders, responsibility of society. Those are really important. But we all, and everyone in this audience, has the control of what they do as individuals. What one piece of advice would you give for individuals in terms of what they could be doing to champion change in this area?
Yeah, I think it all starts with conversation. It's all about communication. And so it's, from a leadership perspective, it's talking to all people throughout the organization, but it's everybody talking to one another about diversity and inclusion and really understanding their perspectives. So it comes back to really listening to what they say and having those honest conversations that sometimes are much harder than you think. And the responses may not be what you think they would be. They might surprise you. They could be really positive. They could be more negative. But hearing that truth enables us to start to initiate change. And you have to understand the scale and scope of what you're dealing with to really actually make any sort of difference. So I think that communication is the first thing at all levels, all colleagues, peer-to-peer, as well as with leadership and colleagues. And then to really think about what action needs to be taken to follow. So I think, there are a number of things that that you can do, but really bringing that policy to life that we talked about earlier, it not being that hidden away document, and making it something that's accessible and that's communicated regularly. And I think it's about awareness, and that is that communication piece, but creating time and space for people to have those conversations and to also educate, because that awareness piece does need to be heightened. And that's leaders and colleagues right across the piece. And I think what's been great for us, and certainly other organisations share their experiences too around setting up that committee, which can be any colleague who wants to join that committee, and they're responsible for driving these initiatives. And that's people at all levels in the organisation, which helps people to feel more comfortable with that communication piece, and constantly talking about the changes that are happening and the initiatives that are being discussed. And then getting everybody to really feel accountable, but knowing that it's not necessarily something, as you discussed earlier, when you were talking to the company you were with in the US. These changes don't necessarily happen overnight, but it doesn't mean that you can't start to positively impact some change. It's not necessarily a quick fix. But building that positive and inclusive workplace culture, whilst it takes time, it's always worthwhile and so rewarding when you see that environment develop and everyone starts to feel so much more empowered and celebrating to be their authentic selves, as you said earlier. And so there's nothing for me that's more important, because it intrinsically linked, as we mentioned, to productivity, to engagement, to EVP. And like you said, people joining new organizations, they need to feel that it's a diverse and inclusive culture more than ever in order for them to A, want to join, and B, get on. So the most important thing, to be their authentic selves.
Thanks, Alex. That's a great answer to that question. And as you were talking there, that point on education as well is it's that notion that it's not only senior leaders or people that are experts in this area educating. The education goes every single way. And when we actually think about a lot of these topics, the education is about understanding different people's lived experience. So to your point, that's why those conversations are so essential. I often hear from senior leaders saying, we just don't have time in the day to add something like this HR initiative, this people initiative, and the time that it's going to take for people to do this. But actually, if we really think about the benefits of this, the benefits are, as a senior leader, if you're taking the time to do this, what you're essentially taking the time to do is educate yourself on people's lived experiences and the differences around that. And so there's huge value to take the time to do these and to have these conversations. And as you say, some of them are going to be really difficult conversations that you're having. We have a few questions from people in the audience, Alex, that I wanted to put to you. The first is from Pooja. Great session. My question is, women were less likely to be hired than men during the coronavirus lockdown. What do you think is the reason for this? What can organisations do to ensure that these exceptional circumstances are used for good change, rather than falling back into flawed practices?
So I think different organisations, different industries, there's it's complex, and there are lots and lots of different reasons for that. I think as a woman myself, I can talk about my experience of being in lockdown. I have two young children, both at school, one at primary school and one at secondary school, and them both homeschooling at home, plus me working full time. What didn't help, we had a brand new puppy, which also didn't help the situation. It was challenging, and you are pulled in so many different directions. And being there and in the house with my children, I was much more accessible day to day for them, and they wanted to pop in and they wanted to talk to me. And we were in a very, very challenging situation as an organisation itself, and so I was working very, very long hours. And I think I felt very compromised. I knew that I had to focus hard on really making sure that our organisation was okay, and that I was doing right by our people, and that our people were safe, and that we were able to ride the storm. But in addition to that, I also recognised that my children were going through an enormous amount of change themselves in the current climate, and that they needed me too. So I felt more compromised as a mother working from home in that situation than I do when there's some disconnection of me being in the office and them being at school. They are being looked after by teachers and by the education system, and I'm at work. So I can talk personally from my own experience that it felt much more pressurized in that environment than when you have that more disconnected environment. When I'm at home with my children, I'm at home with my children, but when I'm at work, I'm at work. And so, from my perspective and from other people that I've spoken to, and certainly talking to many different clients from different industries, they have similar stories. And, I'm not saying that men didn't feel the same in that situation, but I know personally for me, I felt like I was not being as good a mother as I could have been through that period, because I was compromised all the time with doing a lot of things on top of my day job that I wouldn't necessarily normally be doing, home educating, and also just being in the same presence and area means that you're more accessible. So I think it was an incredibly challenging time for everybody, but I know personally that it took its toll, and I know that that's the story that comes from a lot of other females too. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of what we need to do from here, I think certainly from my perspective, having more flexibility is really, really critical. I mean, we have some people in our business who, men and women, who haven't been able to return yet to work because they are have other challenges, whatever they might be. So on that basis, we have to show much more flexibility with people. We've seen that it's actually really, people can work very effectively from home, and we need to be much, much more flexible in our approach, and organizations generally be more flexible in their approach to making sure that we create environments that help people to be the very, very best that they can be. For some people, that's being in the office. For some people, that's not being in the office. For some people, that's a hybrid. And where we can make those compromises, I think we have to make those compromises. But also, I think it's really important to take the time to listen, and truly listen again to what people's real challenges are, and try to find a way together to still allow them to be their best selves, whilst still obviously having the organisation's interests at heart as well.
Alex, that point there of really listening, because there's still so much uncertainty. We were just talking about just before this session started. We just don't know what's going to happen over the next months, potentially years, and that's incredibly difficult for individuals and for organisations. And one of the best things that we can do is kind of listen and try to have those conversations to understand everyone's needs are different, and I would just kind of echo all of those points that you made there about the disproportionate impact that it has had for women, unfortunately. And I also think that for some organisations, some of the decisions that they were making were short-term decisions, which you understand why those decisions were being made in those ways. But I know that there has been a lot of women that have been impacted and also lost roles, and often being measured on productivity and output during a time when they're having to manage multiple different things at home. And so we have been championing this notion of flexible working and this hybrid that works for everyone. But actually those first few months of lockdown aren't reflective of someone working at home normally. Like me, I can't tell you, I mean, Alex, I think we exchanged this, the last 2 weeks I've been more productive than I have for the last four months, because my children are at school. And it's not that I was sat doing the primary homeschooling. My husband was doing more of that than I was, but them being present and around. And as you say, that's really difficult when you're trying to work full time as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that it wasn't representative of what really hybrid or working from home was, because you had so many variables that are not the normal variable when you are working from home. And I think organizations need to remember that, and just recognize that, if the person was productive prior to that, and then there was a period where things were more challenging, that's circumstantial, and that situation now yet again is different. Of course, like you said, it's uncertain, it may change again, but actually we need to be respectful and patient around these very extreme circumstances. Otherwise you could lose incredibly good talent.
Mm-hmm. And it's in any time, whether it's economic kind of downturn, uncertainty, the talent you lose is always the best talent. So that's why it's so important for organisations to be focusing on creating the right environment and culture. It's, I mean, you know this more than me with your entire career in kind of recruitment and HR, Alex, but we know it happens all of the time. And a friend of mine got offered a huge job yesterday, and good people will always be headhunted. It doesn't matter what's going on with the economy.
For sure.
Another question from Victor: What's the employee's role when it comes to championing change? How's their word, opinion, voice should be mapped towards the overall goal, idea of a change, especially in uncertain times like during a pandemic and lockdown? I like that question.
Yeah, so I'm a huge advocate of having as much as you can bottom up as well as top down. And we're an enormous organisation ourselves, but for me, hierarchy exists because it has to. I would rather have the flatter the organisation for me, the better. I want to be a part of everything that is going on and hear what's happening. And I think getting those pulse checks very regularly is incredibly important, but you have to do something with it. And so we have a number of different forums where we look to hear the voices of our colleagues, and then we set up working groups around the key areas. We share the best areas with other areas, because I think it's important also to recognise the things you're good at, and also to really understand where we do need to champion change, or we do need to be doing things differently, and then set up some working groups with ambassadors, again, from the business at all levels, to really champion that, and then to constantly communicate how you're doing against that. And, I think from my perspective, it's absolutely okay to not know all the answers. And it's absolutely okay to recognise that we hadn't thought of it, and we need to now map that, and we are going to get on the journey, but it's going to take us a bit of time. But showing your progress, admitting when you're not making the progress as quickly as you could be, and making sure that you attribute all of the great ideas that come from your people back to those people, so they can see that you're actioning their feedback. Otherwise, you lose that communication channel, and it's such a critical part of your culture. So we really champion this. I think we do a good job of listening to our colleagues and actioning as much as we can, but also calling out where it's not possible, because we can't action everything. But being really honest and upfront, and really prioritising the things that we believe our colleagues think are most important.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, being honest about the things that you have a capacity to do, and the other things that are important, but just they need to be prioritised later on. I think when people know, even if it's a no to something, but the reasons behind that often helps them as well.
Yeah.
And a question from Dina. Alex, when thinking about intersectionality and social mobility, how does Adecco work with clients to ensure diverse talent recruitment? Has this been a challenge?
Yeah, so this is something that has been absolutely at the forefront for some time, but has really, really risen into clients' priority lists over the course of the last few months. And I think our role is really to help them understand their current landscape, but also to help them understand the landscape in the market. So it's important to benchmark where you are as an organisation, but it's also important to benchmark that against the market. Because actually, interestingly, even if your statistics are not, to you, don't feel as if they are strong enough, when you benchmark them in the market, they might actually be stronger than you think. And for me, it's also about helping them to start to build new talent pools of the future, to try and change the market landscape around some of the areas where we haven't got enough diversity, and to support them in trying to change that from the core, as well as trying to change the mix of the existing workforces today. Of course, the more you move the talent around different organizations, the more you squeeze another area to not have that talent. So it's about really facing the core issues with where we have shortages or areas that we need to focus on in order to build those talent pools of the future. So, we are doing more and more work with organizations, but helping them to recognize that they benchmark not just internally, but they benchmark against the market and other industries similar to them, and more broadly, so that they really get a real valuable reading of how they are bearing against the market. And then for us, it's about us working with them to really identify how we can support them in making that change. So we then run programs with them in varying different areas. For example, women in STEM, where we need to support in making sure that we can try and build those talent pools with them in organisations. So I think it's about making sure you start with the data. That data is not just about your own company data, it's also about the data in the market, and then also helping them to think about how they can change building talent pools at the root cause of the issue, rather than just trying to change the talent pools in the organisation today, and pulling from one area to another, which just squeezes the balloon.
It's that's excellent, Alex, and I really like that. I hadn't thought about it in that way, and it happens all the time. As soon as you were talking, I think, how many times do you see that, where you're just moving it within the talent pool you've already got. Therefore, that has a huge impact, and you see it all the time, don't you? When people are moving their top talent across, and the impact that will have on a particular country, a particular division, and diversifying the possibility of your talent pool, and touched on it a few times in a few of these conversations. Actually, is one of the consistent points about industries working together and looking at things. So that, to your point here in this example, data, looking at your market data and your industry data helps you a lot as an organisation. But also then, I think in this area more broadly, industries working together, because as soon as industries start working together to say, actually, we know that in the finance industry, one of the big issues that we have is we don't have enough black men and women in some of the areas, in all of the areas, but even less in some of these areas. Why is that? What could we be doing collectively? Because talent always moves across, doesn't it, from organisation to organisation. And when you're starting to do something actually collaboratively around that, and getting at the grassroots, we're likely to make progress quicker, I think, than each organisation thinking about this in isolation.
Yeah, and I think organisations broadening their minds to bringing people in from outside of their core industry is really critical too. And actually, again, the richness you get from having somebody who's got a completely different perspective outweighs the time it might take for them to get up to speed with understanding and getting to grips with the industry. And I think there can be a bit of fear around that change, recruiting somebody not from the industry. There can be a bit of fear around that change, but actually it has proven to be very successful in many examples.
Yeah, completely. There's so much evidence around that, and it's actually quite quick to learn a new industry as long as someone has the core behaviours and the right approach that they're going to be able to work within that organisation. And I think as well the things that you were just saying there in terms of how does an organisation really kind of focus on diversifying, looking at that data as the starting point. How do you really know until you've looked at the data? You can't. Alex, I'm conscious of time, and it's at 2:30. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you for everyone else that joined the session.